Chapter 1.
Tony went to live at Rhodora in March 1949, and within a few months I had followed him, with David, aged 2, and his Swiss nanny Monique, Beatrice, her friend, who was to help in the house, and the 3 Shelties, Red, Della, and Candy. We were assisted in the almost furnished house by a small group of African servants. On the farm we were helped by a stockman called Clark, whom we had brought out to Kenya, and about 150 African workers. We knew few people at first. Freddie and Vi Ward and their son John, who was shortly to marry Pam Swinton-Hume, lived nearby at Kabazi and were our particular friends. Varley Everett, the son of Sir Percy Everett, Baden-Powell's deputy chief scout, and his wife Joyce lived up the valley. He was to work at Rhodora later. In any case, we were occupied with getting things straight and learning about the farm, an endeavour which Tony approached with great earnestness at first, and as he grew in confidence, with happy flashes of humour.
24th of July, 1949. Work on the farm this week has consisted partly in making a start with getting my hands on the stores, and partly in checking through the cattle again. We told you that we have decided to sell a large part of the herd because we have not got enough grazing for the animals. Clark has examined every cow. At one time he worked for 3 years with a vet, and his knowledge of veterinary matters is a great help to us. For example, he is able to make pregnancy checks which most herdsmen could not do. All the details of the animals are entered on a big sheet under various headings, such as teeth, eyes, skin, and many other headings which are perhaps a little too agricultural for this letter. With these sheets in front of us, together with the cards which contain details of the breeding and milk records of the cows, we go out into the paddock where the animals are assembled. Here the African herdsmen drive out each cow for us to see as we call out its name. With a series of whistles and catcalls they make the cows stand quite still, and some of them are pretty wild, only a few feet in front of us, and it is marvellous to see the way they can produce any cow whose name is called within a few seconds, from a group of, say, 150. We generally take up our position under some thorn trees in the shade. Often there is a soft, warm breeze, and a strange, delicious smell, and somehow, on this farm, in whichever boma, field, we are, there is a wonderful view of the distant hills, which change colour all the time, from pale grey through green to purple and blue. In this setting, we too and Clark make up our minds whether we want to keep or reject each animal, and they then go into the in herd or into the out herd. We have now some lovely cows in our in herd, which do credit to any herd in England. There are 51 milking cows in all. Next week we start choosing the followers, served and empty heifers and calves, to run with this herd. The remaining heifers, of which we have a very large number, are going to run with a bull, needless to say not our Royal Show winner, on our land on the edge of the crater, which is a huge tract of nearly 1,000 acres. We are drafting this letter in our bedroom. We have the window open because David is alone and we are listening for him. Monique, Beatrice, Clark and Eric, the young man whom Clark replaces, have gone to the cinema in Nakuru. As the window is open and our temporary curtains are somewhat inadequate, we are being assailed from time to time by revolting African insects. My special horror is a huge malevolent cricket, but Rosemary detests most the doo-doo, or monstrous flying ant, bigger than a hornet with a sausage body. Outside, this being Saturday night, one can hear the Africans making whoopee, and occasionally beating away at a tom-tom. To add to the general clatter, the bullfrogs have broken into song at night since the rain came, and they compete loudly with the insistent note of the crickets, and the wildcat in the roof has given birth to a kitten which is mewing pitifully and unceasingly, and seems to have been abandoned. Apart from these little details, There is a deathly hush in the heart of Africa. The other morning, I found the fresh spoor of a leopard in the coffee quite near to the house, so we have to be careful with the dogs, to which leopards are very partial. They have the good taste not to be partial to humans under normal circumstances, but they have been known to remove a dog from a veranda at 8:30 in the morning. Dell gives us fits because she will run away and is frightfully nervy, but the other three have settled down well. Here is a sample day which Pops asked for. We are called at 6:30 with tea by Janus, our second boy. Jacob goes and collects my clothes for valeting. By 7 o'clock I am out on the farm. You might think Rosemary goes to sleep again, as breakfast is not till 8, but the houseboys see to it that this is quite impossible. They thump about the house to give an impression that they are cleaning it, and the pantry Toto throws water about on the veranda for them to brush down afterwards. Rosemary gets up after breakfast at 8:30 and goes into the kitchen to see Guara the cook, and to give out stores. I go into the office to see the manager. We generally start a specific job at about 10 o'clock and go on until lunch at 1 o'clock. After lunch, sometimes Rosemary comes with me to the farm, and sometimes she rests. We all have tea together, David, Monique, Beatrice and ourselves on our veranda, and then David comes with us to the cowshed. It is dark by 7, and we have a bath and change into dressing gown and housecoat for dinner, which is an old Kenya custom. We usually go to bed quite early, about 9 o'clock, and are glad to be there. 31st of July, 1949. Last Sunday we had our first lunch party. It went off very well, and we are really beginning to feel more organised now. Some lettuces and small radishes had been sent up from the kitchen garden at the coffee factory. The lettuces made a nice salad, but to our surprise, when the chocolate mousse arrived, it was accompanied not by the biscuits which we had intended, but by a plate of little red radishes. There is a man next door called George Manuel, who is the local magistrate. He does the cultivations for farmers in the district by contract, if they want it. We think we are going to let him do our cultivations for 1 year in order to get our land cleaner and in really good heart. He has much of the latest American equipment, and as we do not possess a tractor, we cannot plough as deeply as we would like. This man is a typical early settler, a rough diamond, brusque of speech, and a heart of gold. I spent the whole day on Tuesday walking round every inch of the farm with him, and making out my cropping programme for 1950 to 51. He stayed to lunch and tea. Charles Long, the local auctioneer, spent the day here on Wednesday and Thursday, and we had customers for our cattle. One woman bought 37 at £40 each. Another man, a prince, wasted most of our afternoon and then bought nothing, and took the auctioneer 50 miles to see a pony which he also did not buy. Friday morning is a great day for shopping in Nakuru, and one meets everybody there and hears all the news. People go down with huge native baskets, one for the butcher, one for the vegetables, and one for the groceries. These baskets are left at the shop as the order is given. Towards the end of the morning, one sees the Africans walking out of the shops with the laden baskets and putting them into the cars. Rosemary has now got it organised so that she makes a big order once a month, and then only has to collect such things as meat, bread and vegetables on the weekly visit. We have no postal delivery, so whenever anyone goes down to town, they call to clear our postbox. We also have no newspapers delivered, and these we get in town. I get the airmail Times, which arrives 4 to 5 days old. Later we have a wireless to get the news from London. Incidentally, there is no telegram delivery service, so that if we are sent a cable, it sits in our postbox until we go into town. Great excitement last night. When I went out at about 9:30 to let out the dogs, I found the Askari, night watchman, all worked up. He had just seen 2 leopards right beside our kitchen window, and whilst I was talking to him, Rosemary heard them cough near our bedroom window. They are after the dogs, of course. We have safety grills on all the bedroom windows. It does not worry us in the least because they are very elusive creatures and not naturally interested in humans. David cannot forget the marching of the guards which he used to see daily from our flat in London. He asks us all the time to play soldiers with him, and we have to march up and down like the guards in front of the palace. There is one particularly filthy spot on the way to the cowshed which fascinates both him and the dogs. The latter find a collection of old bones and dead chickens, whilst David stands in rapt attention, murmuring "cochon" as he gazes at the scruffy and disgraceful multicoloured leggy objects which we have here in the guise of large white pigs. 8th of August, 1949. We are starting this sitting on the back seat of the car, which we have put on the ground at the dog show at Nairobi. Benching for the dogs did not arrive out from England on account of the dock strike, so the dogs have little cubicles made of bamboo allotted to them. We have a nice spacious cubicle for our shelties with their baskets. As we write, the public are streaming by, and great interest is being taken in the dogs, which have never been seen in East Africa before. A man called Dalzell is judging. He is an all-round judge who has been invited out from England by the East Africa Kennel Club. People like smooth-coated animals such as bull terriers and dachshunds because they are less likely to pick up ticks and get tick fever. We de-tick ours every night, and at first we found a lot of ticks on them and some grass fleas. But now we brush some powder into their coats once a week, which does not smell much and keeps away all visitors. We arrived in Nairobi yesterday before lunch and spent our time looking at different makes of motor car, because we must have a second car. There is no telephone at home, and we do not like to leave David without a car available in case of emergency. We went up to the Muthaiga Club for lunch and to leave our suitcases. I have just been elected a member of this club, which is the best in Kenya, and very useful because Rosemary can stay there too. We have a large room with bathroom off, and the cuisine is superlative. Withal, it is much cheaper than a hotel, and one meets a lot of quite nice people, who stay there for business or shopping reasons, having come from all parts of the country. About an hour before dark we found that all the shops were shut, so we motored out 4 miles to the game park. Here we found a pride of 6 lions and 2 cubs, and a row of cars watching them, as one watches the ducks on the Serpentine. We edged our way next to a game warden's truck, and as it got dark, all the other cars went off, so we transferred ourselves into his truck. He took us right in amongst the lions, which are quite accustomed to cars. They walked all around us, and one put its paw up against the window. This has been Jigger Week at Rhodora. A jigger is a tiny insect which burrows into the toes of the unwary who walk about with bare feet, and lay their eggs. Beatrice was the first to fall victim, and she was soundly rebuked by Rosemary for not taking more care. 2 days later, Rosemary got one herself, although she swears that she always wears stockings, so Beatrice has stopped looking quite so downcast. At any time of the day or night now, you will see members of this household anxiously examining their toes. We have at last got some pictures hung. The Zim is in the drawing room, the Laura Knight and the Munnings in our bedroom, and 2 others in the dressing room. It has been quite difficult to get some decent pegs to put into the walls. Since starting this letter, we have got back home, and it is Monday morning. We found everything looking so quiet and peaceful and orderly. One was able to appreciate just how much ground we have covered towards getting the house the way we want it. It was lovely, too, to get back to smiling faces, because not only were the girls and David pleased to see us, But for some unknown reason, the houseboys were too, and they ran out to greet us with beaming faces, including Guara the cook, who has a quiet and undemonstrative character. 14th of August, 1949. Just as David was finishing a belated tea and we were all quite exhausted, the dogs barked, and a strange family consisting of mother, father, brother-in-law and 2 little girls walked straight in on us onto our veranda. They had come to call. Rosemary glared. I swallowed and said how lovely it was to see them. In the end, everything worked out all right, because after David had quite finished his tea, the 2 little girls played games with him, and I really think he enjoyed himself more than I have ever seen him enjoy himself before. People are like that out here. They just walk right in on you. I suppose it is because there are no telephones. As I was beginning to type this letter from the draft, Sunday morning, 2 different families arrived to call within 5 minutes of each other. And now that I can get back to the typing, it is nearly lunchtime, and we have John Ward coming to lunch. On the farm, we drove our last culled cows to Alpanyata station on Thursday. 47 were driven, and 1 had to go in the lorry because it was so weak we did not think it would survive. We also took in 15 weaner pigs, which were sold because we are dreadfully overcrowded in the pigsties and cannot start getting law and order until we have culled a lot in this department too. A start has been made in the scrubbing out of the cowshed and so-called dairy, and the institution of a cowshed routine. We are also busy tackling the question of improving our pastures. We are putting on about £60 to the acre of fertiliser, and then disking and harrowing the land to let the fertiliser in. Now we want rain again to consolidate. I am told no one in Kenya has ever put anything on their pastures before, because they are mostly not interested in intensive farming. It will be interesting to see the results of our experiment. One evening we went up to see Freddie and Vi with a long list of questions. Among other things, we decided that we shall have to buy a small circular saw, because all our water is heated by wood fires, and cutting all the wood is getting beyond the joke. We now find that there are no circular saws to be found in Nakuru, but we are hoping to find one in Nairobi. Our dark brown bath water, which comes to us from the Crater Stream and which Rosemary considers is the greatest snag to living in Kenya, has also been engaging our attention. It seems that we may be able to get special filters in addition to those we have, and we may be able to have clear water. This is only bath water, of course. Our drinking water comes from large tanks which collect the rainwater off the roof. This again is boiled, cooled and then filtered each day. There was tremendous twittering and chattering amongst the boys last night at 6 p.m. on our return from evening milking. They had discovered 2 long, bright green snakes hanging in the large pepper tree beside the nursery. A pepper tree looks a bit like an evergreen oak, but it is much lighter in colour. I went off and borrowed a shotgun from a neighbour and eliminated them quickly. The boys swear they were terribly dangerous snakes, but everyone else has told us they were quite harmless. Jacob, our head boy, whom we told you we did not much like, has solved any problem there might be in the future by giving notice to leave at the end of the month. He says it is too cold here. We shall probably bring Ochieng into the dining room to work with Janus, and we have engaged another nursery boy to come at the end of the month. Our 3 houseboys will then be of the Luo tribe, who are tall and graceful in their bearing, whilst the kitchen staff, pantry boy and Dobie, laundry boy, are all Kikuyu, who are considered the most intelligent tribe. 21st of August, 1949. We did a lot of planning last Sunday whilst John Ward was here. For economic reasons, I am afraid it was long-term, though a lot depends on getting our coffee crop yielding a regular instead of a bi-annual income. First, we tackled the cowshed and redesigned it double the size with a partition in the middle. One end for our future pedigree herd, and one end for the grade herd. The recorder to be in the centre to cope with both herds. Through the central portion of the building, one would walk through to a new dairy, which we visualise equipped with a sterilising chest, together with a changing room and washing room for the herd boys. There will be a separate calf house for each herd and separate yards with boxes round them. We are going to move the native village to one end of the farm, which will isolate the Africans from the cattle. A most necessary measure when you know that every year there is some dreadful outbreak of disease, such as foot and mouth or rinderpest, on some farm in this district. Then a new pig house with paddocking for the pigs will be built on the site at present occupied by the native village, about 500 yards from the cowshed. The old pig house will be converted to a food store and a small office for the stockmen. All this involves the relaying of roads and water piping and the resetting of many fences. We call it our 5-year plan, but in her present frame of mind, Rosemary will not be able to wait that long before it all has to be done. Wednesday was the girls' half-day, and they set off in the small car to Nakuru to shop and go to the cinema. We also started off after lunch to the Bahati forest to see the forest officer about fencing posts. Of course, we took David and the little white dog on wheels, which Mutz gave him, together with a picnic tea. It was a beautiful 10-mile drive up to the forest. We passed huge fields of green wheat and maize. The banks along the sides of the roads were lush with vegetation and coloured with many wildflowers. Wonderful little birds flew in and out of the flowers. The forest officer was out, so we proceeded past his hut and plunged into the forest along a broad red mud road, climbing all the way. It is magnificent, just one's idea of a tropical forest. The trees are enormous, and under them is a dense and impenetrable vegetation. Every tree seems to have a kind of parasite clinging to it and entwined all over it. This creates a mass of hanging green ropes which interlock in many places and form a jumbled tracery. Many of the trees lean at funny angles, and the huge trunks look gnarled and old. It was dark and sinister amongst the trees, but the sun shone on our road, and there was something about the general effect which made Rosemary say she was almost back on the new drive in the woods at Exbury. We got out of the car and went for a walk. The whole forest seemed to be alive. There was the constant sound of the insects and the vari-coloured birds which fluttered from tree to tree. We heard colobus monkeys barking all around, but unfortunately didn't see them as their noise frightened David. I think because he did not know what monkeys are. We had tea inside the car because he seemed to prefer the safety of this to being outside. But later he summoned up the courage to walk with us down the road, a tiny figure trailing his little white dog, flanked on each side by the massive trees. There had been a good deal of rain up there, and the smell of the trees and the vegetation was delicious. The next day we had a visit from the labour officer, whom I'd invited to see us in order to find out more about the management of labour here. I discovered that there are no set hours of work, and one can, in theory, work the labour as many hours as one wishes to. But in practice it is a very different matter. They work when one is present, but when one leaves the field, they sit down. Working them longer hours does not mean more work. The problem is rather one of discipline. Our men now have to work from 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. 6 days a week, and they think this is very hard. The labour officer sent in amongst the men a trusted spy, and he brought back the information that I was considered a bwana mbaya, bad boss, for making them work like this. But they will get used to it. Already there is a great difference in the attitude of the labour on the farm. They are far more respectful and greet you with a jambo instead of a sullen face. As for food, we give our labour 2 pounds of crushed maize, posho, per head per day and a quarter pint of milk. They have half an acre of land of their own to cultivate. As we have about 170 in our books, this means that we have to put aside about 75 acres to grow their maize, and they also have another 75 acres for their own gardens and crops. This cuts into our arable land a lot, and we also have to provide a site for the native village. We give them salt, but we do not give them meat or beans as yet. They would rather have the maize. It fills their tummies. The question of African feeding needs more investigation. Different people treat it in differing ways. For instance, at Kabazi, they give them one hot meal a day, consisting of maize and vegetables, but they do not give them milk, and only occasionally meat. Of course, one well-cooked meal is better for them than their own culinary efforts in their huts. One of the reasons why they do not work well is because they are undernourished and their diet is so badly balanced. In conjunction with this man's visit, we went to see a new housing scheme near Nakuru, where a native village rather like ours was being equipped with various expensive accessories, such as a communal kitchen, a communal dining room, a recreation room, showers and latrines. The main snag to all this, in addition to the heavy cost, is that it needs a European to look after it. For the Africans, though certain tribes will keep their own huts spotless, have not enough sense of community yet to get one of their number to keep any such centre clean. They do not understand these things, and might well, for example, use the chairs in the recreation room for firewood. After my visit to the latrines in this place, I came away feeling that the present method of manuring our coffee and maize is a better one. It is extremely discreet, and one never notices a thing. However, I have promised our Africans here that I will give them decent water facilities. There is no water in the present village, and a better church in their new village. 28th of August 1949. We spent last Sunday with Freddie, Vi and John at Kabazi, arriving in time for lunch and afterwards going round the cheese factory on their farm where our milk goes. It was spotless and beautifully run. In the storeroom it was fascinating to see the rows of cheddar cheeses, some waxed in yellow and some in red. Buttermaking also goes on there on quite a scale, and we were pleased to see how much yellower was the butter from our Guernsey milk than that from their Ayrshire milk. Their canning factory next door to the cheese factory is nearly ready to start up. They have switched the whole of the market garden over from growing produce for shops to producing vegetables suitable for the can. These two factories are something new in the valley, and they bear testimony to the vitality and initiative of the Ward family. Freddie gave us a good lecture about our coffee, which he says is Rhodora's lifeblood at present. He wants us to get an expert in as coffee manager when Peter Howard, our present farm manager, leaves, which he must do sooner or later because he has a European settlement board farm of his own, to which he will soon have to devote all his time. Freddie says it takes 5 years to train a coffee man, and our 180 acres of coffee need a full-time man. Even if I tried to do it alone, he says that I will know so little about it that I will not be able to carry out properly the suggestions of our visiting coffee agent, Peter McMaster. A difference of only 5 or 6 tons of coffee a year will pay the wage of a first-class man, whose knowledge should easily make that much difference to the annual crop. There is always something new to learn about coffee. We had a sack of our own coffee sent up here last week. Guara roasted it, but evidently not enough because it was bitter and quite undrinkable. Then he over-roasted it and put in some sugar with the beans. Still undrinkable. Now we have shop coffee again and wait for some expert housewife to tell us where we trip up. When we find this coffee manager, we await with interest the reaction of our Mr. Clark, who has already done his best to displace Peter Howard, and seems to be angling for the job of farm manager, a job for which, in our opinion, he is not suited. His family arrive out here in the first week of September. He misses them a lot, and we think it will be better when they are here. After we got back from the Kabazi visit, I was typing the newsletter on the veranda at about 9:30 p.m. when a deputation of our houseboys arrived to tell me that the kitchen Toto had been absent without leave since 4 o'clock, and that he had taken the cook's raincoat, the pantry Toto's sweater, and 55 shillings borrowed all round. All this he had taken to pay his card debts. Our night guard stated that he knew where this gambling hell could be found. So I went off in the car to George Manuel's neighbouring farm, together with the guard and Guara. Then George and I and these Africans set out for the place indicated by the guard. We went to a group of huts dotted about amongst maize, often twice as high as a man. It was rather like Hampton Court maze as we threaded our way along the tracks through it. We spent 2 hours knocking up huts, but we could not find the boy. However, he came back here at 2 a.m., so now he is going to get very little pay for some months until he has paid off his debts. The cook got his raincoat back. 4th of September 1949. We have finally sighted the new native village. We still intend to move the existing village house by house, but we shall put better water facilities and a better church in the new village. It is only the Jaluas that we are going to move. They are the majority of the labour. The Kikuyus are already sighted in a place where the cattle do not go. The Lumbwas we are going to leave where they are, because they are the tribe which has to do with the cattle. 9th of September 1949. We suspected something queer was going on with David when we saw him bubbling at the mouth one day at tea. Our fears were confirmed the next afternoon on a walk, when we heard a strange but familiar noise going on. A raucous clearing of the throat, followed by a loud spit. It came from his lordship, who was walking in front of us, dragging a stick. Rosemary stopped him and asked him what he was doing, whereupon he repeated the performance. A copy of what our Indian fundis, workmen, are doing all day long. Revolting little boy. To cap it all, he started roaring with laughter until he fell over a puddle, stick and all. One warm evening recently, just as we were thinking about bed, we heard a troubadour strumming a guitar and singing, in perfect English, as he strolled down the road. I rushed out and caught him. He turned out to be our native clerk, Livingston. All the girls came out onto the veranda in their dressing gowns, and Livingston stood on the steps and gave us a little concert, singing spirituals, some in English, some in Swahili, and some in his native Kavirondo tongue. 18th of September 1949. The vet situation may improve here shortly. The farmers in Solai are getting together to pay the expenses of having one out, just for the valley. There was a meeting recently, and it was quite amusing, because there is a hard core of resistance to the plan from the old settlers who run semi-native cattle anyhow, anywhere, and say that they have managed for 20 years without a vet, and do not see why they should have one now. One of these old-timers turned up to call at 10:30 on Monday morning. Rosemary was out seeing Mrs. Clark. I had just come down from the roof, where I had been trying to catch a kitten and was covered in cobwebs. Monique was taking a turn at the job, so we had an old table with the steps standing on it in the middle of the sitting room, and a gaping hole in the ceiling, through which she ascended into the roof. Upon this scene descended Mrs. Bailey in a blue spotted silk dress, obviously her best, a large white felt hat, approximately Ascot 1910, and white gloves. Her old husband was in tow, having been dressed up in his best grey trousers and sweater. She announced that she had decided not to play bridge this week, but to go calling instead. In her next breath she told us that she had lived in the valley for 34 years, and her husband made me think ruefully of our capital when he said that he originally purchased a block of land of 5,000 acres in which this farm was included for the total sum of £35. That was 40 years ago. Rosemary arrived back in the middle of this jolly chit-chat, and once she had gathered that it was purely a social visit, became barely civil and kept looking at her watch and answering "yes" when she should say "no," and vice versa. After a bit the old couple ambled off, and marvelling at the ways of Kenya's early settlers, Rosemary went off to her date with Clark at the cowshed, where they were examining the senior heifer herd, and I went to my desk. Yesterday was Monique's birthday, so I arranged that we should all go on a safari to an unknown destination. We set off after an early lunch. David, Beatrice, Monique, Peter Howard, ourselves, both cars, tea and rugs. I had arranged to pick up a guide from the police station 10 miles down the valley, but when we arrived we found that the guide had been sent into the reserve with a letter for the chief. However, the policeman himself, very different from the English Bobby, more the army officer type, said that he would show us the road, which was very nice of him and lucky for us. The Kamasia Reserve is inhabited only by the Kamasia tribe, and no white man may live there or enter the reserve without permission. It is a huge area, as big as many British counties together. We plunged in. There are no roads, and it was very rough going. It was amazing to see the soil erosion, caused entirely by overstocking with native cattle. There were large bare patches of soil where the land had nearly gone back to desert. Much of it was rocky, and there were wonderful views of hills and mountains near and far. At times we were crossing an open plain, or climbing a rocky escarpment, or plunging through elephant grass and bush which stood higher than the bonnet of the big car. We saw a little game, such as impala, marabou storks, and vultures clustered around a dead cow. We passed a number of very wild-looking men herding the native cattle. They carried spears or bows and arrows, and were dressed in skins, and their coiffure consisted of elaborate small pigtails, neatly braided and coated with red mud. Instead of skins, some of them wore orange and red cloth sheets, and in the split lobes of their ears were brightly coloured beads with necklaces, bracelets and anklets to match. We travelled through this country for 2 hours. It was very hot, and we thought we would never reach our destination. David showed signs of feeling carsick. Suddenly we were there. We found ourselves at the edge of a cliff from which we looked down 2,000 feet to the glistening blue water of Lake Harrington. It was a huge, long, narrow lake, fringed in pink by flamingos. The policeman told us that not many Englishmen have seen it. We had a picnic tea at the edge of the cliff, but we were a bit nervous because we had no weapons, and it was lion country. We got back at about 6:30, Rosemary relieved to be safely home, because, as she pointed out, safaris are best done on our own and not with a child of 2. But it is certainly interesting to know that such very wild men live only 15 miles away from us. We have also had our first experience of safari ants. It has been wet this week, with rain most afternoons, and that is why they were on the move. We found them just at the back of the office, and the columns had made a rut in the road because so many had passed by. Yet to our certain knowledge they were still passing 15 hours later. They present a frightening sight. Millions and millions of tiny brown insects, which, small as they are, destroy everything in their path. One nasty thing about them is that they all bite to a pre-arranged signal, so that if you got them on you, they would be all over you before you were bitten, and then they would all bite. David's cot stands with each leg in water in case they should ever invade his room at night. They will not cross water. We have had some lovely letters from you all this week, which have given us great pleasure. We love hearing from you and are never bored with anything you tell us. Dad, in his letter, says it is hard for him to imagine our surroundings because the East, as he knows it, is so burnt up. Actually, this valley for 9 months of the year is as green as summer in England. It is only for 3 months that it is burnt to a golden brown, but even then, the trees and bushes stay green. For example, our coffee is always green. Very few trees out here are deciduous. Of course, the crops ripen to a golden yellow, just as in England, and our barley now is just turning from green to yellow, and so are some of our oats. The maize is still green and will not go brown until December. The time not to see quinoa is in January, February and March, which is what they call their winter. It is hot then and dusty on the roads. The rains come in April and it becomes almost immediately green again. Leo, in his letter, asks how we prepare our newsletters. They are entirely a joint affair. We generally start off on Saturday evenings and take it in turns to write the draft, changing over as our wrists begin to ache. Rosemary usually checks the draft and adds little bits, and I do the typing and make any other alterations which seem necessary as I go along. So Leo was quite right when he said that sometimes he can hear Rosemary and sometimes me. 25th of September, 1949. We were sitting at lunch on Wednesday when Peter Howard asked us what our reactions were to devaluation. This was the first we had heard of it. So we had lived for 4 days in blissful ignorance of the cosmic disturbance of the descent of the pound sterling. We kept saying that we must get a wireless to keep us in touch with world affairs, and we got as far as having one up on APRO. But either because of my great skill in electrical matters, or because the reception is notoriously bad all over Kenya, we sent it back in disgust. The last 3 times that I have been into Nakuru, I tried to get a daily paper, but they were all sold out. The Airmail Times is our only real source of quick news. Sometimes it arrives 3 days and sometimes 5 days old. However, we have heard this week that we are practically certain to get the telephone within 12 months, and maybe much sooner. Being without early news makes life less agitated. Perhaps it is rather like living in the country at the turn of the century in England. Thanks to all your letters, a steady supply of papers and books from England, which arrive about 5 weeks old, and the Airmail Times, we feel we keep more or less up to date. But a yearly visit to Europe will be important to shake up our ideas. Eddie had written that we should be careful of the baboons. He need have no fear, for they never approach far from the edge of the crater, and that is half a mile from the house. They do not attack a man unless they are in large numbers and can get him cornered. They are quick to run away when they see the maize guards. I have now managed to find a reliable African, and I have borrowed an old 12-bore shotgun, and I have bought some SSG shot. He will get 1 shilling for every baboon he shoots. We think that this will relieve several of the maize guards for work on the coffee. We have to keep quite a lot of the guards on to protect the maize from the Africans themselves. The curious thing is that the baboons have no fear of women, and will come right up to them, and even take the food they may be preparing for cooking. But they run away from a man or a woman in trousers. My Mannlicher rifle and small automatic pistol have arrived in this country, and I hope to have them soon and to reckon with a few of the baboons with the rifle. 2nd of October 1949. On Monday morning we made an early start at 7 a.m, stopping at the local inn at Naivasha for breakfast and arriving at Nairobi at 9:30 a.m. Now that our big car is run in, we can cover the 108 miles to Nairobi in 2 hours if we really hurry. It is a straight tarmac road built by the Italian prisoners during the war, and there is not much traffic on it. On arrival, our first call was at the office of the Express Transport Company, and we were taken round to see our damaged container of furniture. We had to wait while all the things, so beautifully packed in London, were bundled out and parked anywhere on the floor of the bonded warehouse. I am sorry to report that I was so afflicted by waves of uncontrollable anger that Rosemary became ashamed of me and had to wander vaguely around the corner, gazing at packing cases which did not concern us, and hoping that no one would know that she was anything to do with me. On Tuesday afternoon, the container which was undamaged arrived up here, and we all set to immediately to unpack it. David sat on a cushion on the parapet of the veranda, with a rapt expression on his face, murmuring "fun" and "nice" at intervals. Everything came out in perfect order, and in the middle of the load we found the Van Goyen and the Jade. It was quite exciting unpacking them, and a great relief to find the picture absolutely perfect and the Jade unbroken. On Thursday afternoon the damaged container arrived. As it approached, we saw that one piece of furniture was roped on top on the outside of the tarpaulin. As it lurched up the drive, the branches of the trees brushed against it. When we unpacked it, we found that it was the wooden cabinet of the grandfather clock, which has a William and Mary front. It was none the worse for wear. The container itself was sitting at such an angle on the lorry that it was a miracle that it had not fallen off and turned the lorry over. 9th of October, 1949. The cattle arrived on Monday morning, attended by a charming young man called Edward Latter, who is working his way round the world on the way back to his home in New Zealand, where his family own a sheep farm. The animals were all in good condition. Latter told us that the ship put in for 6 days at Port Sudan, and the heat was so intense that the cattle lay down with their heads back, gasping. He spent 4 hours each day hosing them with seawater, and I think this contributed a lot towards getting them here safely. The shippers had provided them with every sort of food that they needed for the journey, except minerals, and Latter got salt from the galley, and the captain and the crew were most interested in them and made a great fuss of them, especially of the bull, and used to bring them sugar and apples to eat. They spent 2 days coming up from Mombasa, and Latter slept in the cattle truck with them. He groomed them every day, and in fact did his best to look after them properly. I think we told you that the Union Castle line granted him a free passage in view of the value of the consignment. Valentine, the bull, walked calmly out of the cattle truck, but he did not live up to his reputation for having a quiet and easy temperament when it came to loading him onto our open 3-ton lorry. Having been accustomed to nothing but the most deluxe show cattle vans at Fernhill Park, he found this another blow to his dignity, which in any case had been somewhat wounded when he was put in a sling and hauled out of the ship by a crane. Rosemary met them all at the farm. We got the lorry right up to the pedigree boxes. These are only made of wood at present, but all had been newly whitewashed and disinfected, and clean sawdust was on the floor. We use sawdust because it is tick-resistant, and it is essential until they have been through their inoculations. Valentine goes for a walk every day on the farm roads, and he, together with the heifers, has been shampooed to get a nice coat after the sea-water. The main problem with the heifers is that some of them are in urgent need of horn trainers, and we cannot get any out here. But we are trying to get copies made of the one pair which we brought out. We are going to try to keep all these pedigrees in show condition because of the arrival of those animals, together with our high-grade herd, makes us just about the leading Guernsey herd here in Kenya. For one thing, Valentine is, so far as we know, the only prize-winning animal, 2 years running, at the Royal Show, which has ever been imported into Kenya, and he, the heifers, and the great herd will probably attract numerous visitors. We are rugging them at night so that they will not grow shaggy coats. The nights are cold here. Clark's son has been put in charge of the pedigrees under his father, and he had 2 Africans to help him. There are now 26 cattle in all, including those which we took over with the farm and the bulls. I am sending this week for the first vaccines. There are about 7 in all: red water, anaplasmosis, marginal, anthrax, rinderpest, black quarter, and strain 19 against contagious abortion. All these have to be given at different times, and blood slides taken and sent down to the government veterinary officer. If no reaction is seen on the slides, they have to be done again, and thus the whole series may take months. Mr. and Mrs. Gamer came to lunch the following day. She is a dog breeder, while he is a pig inspector for the pig board. She has a great personality, and Rosemary says she reminds her of Sybil Grant in many ways, especially in her taste in clothes. She wore a bright orange and green dress, an emerald green silk scarf tied round her head gypsy fashion and embroidered with jade beads, which somehow managed to continue on as a necklace, long jade earrings, and to crown the whole ensemble, a pair of bright orange suede shoes, in which, in spite of the high heels, she walked smartly round the farm after lunch. She told us that she sleeps out of doors in a wire cage with 4 Alsatians. Wednesday was a great picture-hanging morning. With the help of a local builder and 1 Indian, we managed to find places for most of the pictures and the Venetian mirrors. We left at 9 a.m. on Thursday, and our first call was Ngong, some 10 miles from Nairobi, where there is a school for training Africans in cattle management and rudimentary veterinary medicine. We made ourselves known to the principal, who turned out to be a most lackadaisical Englishman of about 40, with a super Oxford accent and wearing desert boots, pale blue dungarees, and a blue silk handkerchief around his neck. His hair was halfway down his back, and he must have spent most of a bottle of peroxide emptied on it. He sat at his desk, gazing at his beautiful fingernails, and, after a long pause, said, "I am afraid that my boys here, far from being improved by our education, tend to become very cheeky and untrustworthy." After pondering on this statement for a while, we decided to try one of his bays for a specific job we have in mind. So we expect that an African speaking the most refined English will turn up here soon and probably upset the whole of our farm labour. This man showed us round some nice clean whitewashed buildings roofed in thatch, and we were very interested to see a Zarwal bull imported from India, whose recorded dam had given 800 gallons. This is a humped breed, and therefore drought-resistant, just as the local native Zebu breed is here. The point is that the native breed here yields very little milk, and when crossed with English-type bulls, it loses its hump and quickly succumbs to disease if in a native reserve area. It does, of course, yield more milk, but this is no good to the natives if it cannot live. So these bulls, from the best stock in India, are being tried experimentally on the native cows, and they have already managed to get a first cross to yield 550 gallons, and it still has a hump. On Saturday, we went out to the Jacaranda Coffee Research Station, passing some ostriches on the road. Here we studied the operation of their coffee factory, experiments which they are making in composting, other experiments in mulching and manuring. Quite apart from devaluation, the world position of coffee is extremely favourable. Brazil has reduced her output from 22 million to 8 million tonnes, and there is now a world shortage. Even if Brazil tries to come in again, it takes 8 years for a coffee tree to come into bearing. All our coffee here could be sold for dollars, and the outlook is most heartening. 16th of October, 1949. We started the week with a small scare. Karanja, our chauffeur, a delightful and competent fellow, has for some time been negotiating for the purchase of a bibi, wife. His prospective father-in-law, who lives at Kabazi, is trying to drive a hard bargain and is demanding an outrageous sum of money and many goats. Last week, Karanja asked for 1 month's leave to try to settle the affair, which is normally a matter for prolonged negotiation. But before he went, he found us another chauffeur to take his place while he is away. This second boy we also like very much. On Monday we sent him off to Nairobi in the little Ford Prefect by himself to collect 1 or 2 things for us from various shops. He left at 7 a.m, and we expected him back easily by tea time. When nightfall came, he had still not returned, and we began to blame ourselves for trusting him on such a journey when we had known him such a short while. After all, he might have driven the car straight into the Kikuyu Reserve and sold it. Or he might have had an accident and be lying in hospital somewhere with our car being stripped in an Indian garage and no one bothering to let us know. Or the car might have broken down, and he had very little money and would not be able to get credit to have it repaired. With all these possibilities and others in our minds, Rosemary and I were really worried by the next morning. I went into the kitchen to Gwara, our cook, who in times of trouble with any member of our staff usually has wise advice. "Is driver Missouri good, boy? Or Mbaya bad, boy?" I asked. Gwara grinned. "Missouri boy," he said. "Accident most likely." When Peter Howard came to work, I told him about it. "Oh," he said, "didn't you know that yesterday was the King's birthday and a general holiday, so all the shops were shut in Nairobi?" The chauffeur duly turned up after lunch, having done all the jobs, with the car looking clean and well cared for as usual. I have at last got down to sorting out all stores and rearranging them, a job held up because we had nowhere to put our hundreds of sacks. Now we have disposed of the sacks in a special store of their own. We have a long row of buildings out at the back of the house. The first partition is the laundry, which we converted and equipped with hot and cold water, wash tubs, cupboards and ironing table. Then comes the general office, which is well fitted with desks, cupboards and a built-in safe. Next there is a room for our trunks and odds and ends of furniture. Then a large store for spares such as wire, milk cans, machinery spares, coffee-picking baskets, motor and tractor tyres, etc. This is followed by a large shed for consumable stores such as nails and screws, paint, tools, and a whole host of other things. Then comes a small forge with assorted ironmongery around the walls. Lastly, a timber store, where we have got a lot of sawn wood going through the lengthy process of seasoning. The store for petrol and kerosene is quite apart from the other stores as a precaution against fire. Like everything else in this country, all these stores have to be carefully locked up at all times, and they have a guard on them at night. The responsibility for the stores will rest with Livingston, our African clerk, who is quite well educated, speaks English, and can type, but neither Peter Howard nor I are temperamentally attuned to him, so I do not know how long it will be before he gets replaced. He earns 106 shillings a month, which is more than any other African on the farm. I have also this week been fixing up my own personal office, which we have arranged in a secluded, sunny corner of the veranda, away from the main part of the house. It consists of a desk and chair, a cupboard for my files, the large green velvet chair, a row of farming and veterinary reference books, and a dog basket, for whichever member of the pack condescends to keep me company. The gardens out here are really lovely everywhere, and one can grow the most exotic things as well as most of the English flowers. This week Rosemary has in the sitting room a huge vase consisting of red-hot pokers, yellow iris, Montbritia, yellow carnations, and alstroemeria. They make a wonderful glowing show. On the so-called dining room table is a flat bowl of alstromerias, cut short with Montbritias, and on the writing table is a large vase of deep red and orange-red carnations, which she buys from Kabazi for 1 6 a dozen. In our bedroom is a bowl of gigantic roses, which Vi gave her. They are all the best English stock, and are perfectly wonderful. One can have, for 10 shillings, as many flowers as would gratify a film star. Last week, to vary the selection, we had the big vase full of arum lilies and agapanthus, while the dining room table had white freesias and blue anemones, and the writing table had white freesias. The garden outside looks rather bare, the only real colour being the bougainvillea and frangipani, but we hope to tackle the garden soon now. Today has been David's 2nd birthday. He came to our room after breakfast and unwrapped his parcels himself. We think he was most thrilled with a large red railway engine which the Swiss girls gave him. After lunch we took him out in the car together with the 2 girls and Mr. and Mrs. Clark. We went right round the Solai and Sabukia valleys, a distance of 65 miles, and had a picnic tea on the way. There was a birthday cake for David with icing and 2 candles, and Happy Birthday David on it, which we had made in Nakuru, because we cannot buy icing sugar out here at present. Rosemary and I felt sad that he will never be 2 again, and we can hardly believe that he has only been in our lives for 2 years. 23rd of October 1949. On Sunday there was a wild panic. The houseboys cheerfully used up all the water in our tank, and then came to tell us that Dopey, the boy who comes daily from the farm to pump the water up to the tank, had not turned up. Mad rush by me into the kitchen to have the fire raked out before the boiler burst. Dopey turned up in the afternoon, and, so far as I could understand, explained that he had been to visit his deceased aunt's maternal uncle. More likely that he had spent the morning in a horizontal position, wrapped in his blanket in the land of dreams. Then the tractor drivers distinguished themselves. The first day they broke the disc harrows. We could not go on with cleaning the coffee. The second day they broke the baler. We could not go on with baling the barley straw. The third day they broke the mower. We could not go on with mowing hay. As you may imagine, I was somewhat annoyed, and I made a few disparaging remarks. Repairs are being tackled by Okola, our carpenter and smith, who wears a huge pair of Charlie Chaplin boots and very little else, and by his assistant Toto, who derives his name from the Swahili word lala, meaning sleep. Lala is a wonderful character, for he is able to move so slowly that unless he is chased, he is able to start sweeping out the office in the morning and be still doing it in the evening. One day, when I was going round the work on the farm in the car with Rosemary and the 3 dogs, we went to see the contractors who are clearing the crater land. It was a lovely summery day, as it nearly always is, with a delicious warm heat. When the bush got so dense that we could not proceed further by car, I left Rosemary behind and set off on foot with Red and Dell. Candy stays behind with her mistress. I was about to cross the crater stream to see the second contractor who is doing that part of the land, when I found 4 Bibis, African women, walking in line with an enormous load of firewood suspended on each back by a strap around their foreheads. They did not hear me come, so I fell in behind and followed them up a winding track over the hill at the boundary of our farm. In a little while, one of them stopped and, turning round, saw me, and stood glued to the spot with fright, for they came from the neighbouring farm and were stealing wood which is being stocked for our farm village. I pointed back down the path they had just come up and told them, "Umbwa mbaya sana," dogs very bad. Luckily, they did not notice that Dell was quite terrified of them and only had the one idea of getting back to the car as soon as possible. They set off back the way they had come, and I fell in behind again with the dogs. In due course we met our askari, who has been allowed by the police to have a gun to guard our maize against the baboons. He is a special policeman. He took over from me and took the women up to our native village. Here they were made to hand over the wood to our women. Then the Wazay, elders, held a council and fined them each 5 shillings, total 20 shillings, of which 10 comes to me and 10 to the Wazay. They made the women go and fetch the money, and gave them each one with the kiboko, stick, before they sent them away. The askari gets a shilling above his pay for every baboon he shoots, and now he will get 2 shillings for every wood thief he can catch in the craterland, though, of course, he will not take his gun down there. 30th of October, 1949. On Tuesday night, Clark came to tell us that one of our imported heifers was sick with stomach trouble. After 2 trips to the telephone box 2 miles down the road, I managed to get hold of the private vet at Rongai, who promised to come along the next morning, but prescribed that meanwhile the heifer should be drenched with oatmeal gruel. In this crisis, Clark did not seem to think it necessary to get up in the night, so Roland Williams and I did the job at 2 a.m., and after we had done it, went round the farm checking up on the maize guards. Clark is causing us considerable anxiety at present in many ways. On Thursday we set off at 7 a.m. for Nairobi, and after lunch called at the Corendon Museum to try to identify the snakes we have had here. On Tuesday a large one was killed by the pedigree sheds, and this we identified as a puff adder. The 2 green ones which we killed in the pepper tree beside the nursery some time ago were probably mambas. Both these types of snakes are deadly. We had tea at the Norfolk Hotel, hoping to see Deborah Carr and Stuart Granger, who are staying there during the making of the film King Solomon's Mines, but we were unlucky. So we went off to the game park, where we wandered on our way for some 15 miles to the hippo pools. We saw quite a variety of game, such as giraffe, wildebeest, zebra, Thompson's and Grant's gazelles, impala, waterbuck, jackal, which slunk across the road just in front of the car, ostriches, and at the hippo pools the hippos and some small monkeys. We did not see any lions, which was rather a disappointment for Roland. We saw Roland off at 7:30 this morning. The chauffeur took him to Lake Naivasha, which is halfway between here and Nairobi, in the big car. At about 10:30 this morning, as we were walking in the paddocks, we had a fine view of his flying boat passing overhead near the farm on its way to Khartoum in England. He carried with him a little bit of the lifeblood of Rhodora for our parents, in the form of a small bag of coffee.